Science has always been humanity's greatest tool for discovery, a light illuminating our dark future. But sometimes, that light turns into an uncontrollable power that shadows innocent lives. Now, let's dive into some of the darkest experiments carried out in the name of science. The Triplets Experiment. Eddie, David, and Robert's lost years. On July 12, 1961, a young unmarried mother was giving birth in a hospital. She was expecting quadruplets, but tragically lost the fourth baby during delivery. The three surviving babies were healthy. After the birth, the necessary procedures were completed and the children were sent to the Louise Wise Adoption Agency in New York. Everything seemed normal until it was revealed that the adoption of the triplets was overseen by Dr. Peter Neubauer, a psychiatrist. Neubauer arranged for each triplet to be placed with a different family, carefully selected families who were unaware that the children were part of an experiment. These families differed in their child-rearing styles and socioeconomic status. Since all adoptions were through the same agency, the researchers could easily monitor and collect data on the children's development. Neubauer and his clinical psychology team conducted numerous similar studies, separating siblings into different homes. However, the true purpose and results of these experiments remain unknown, as all records are sealed in Yale University archives until 2066. Each year, families were visited by researchers, supposedly checking on the children's progress. But after being told these were standard procedures, suspicions faded. The experiment's shocking revelation came in 1980, when the triplets accidentally found each other. Robert, enrolling at a vocational school in New York, was often mistaken for Eddie by his friends. Strangers and even acquaintances called him by Eddie's name, which confused him. Through a mutual friend, Robert and Eddie finally met and discovered they were born on the same day, adopted from the same agency, and even shared similar tastes. Shortly after, David read an article titled "Separated Twins," featuring photos of Robert and Eddie. Recognizing their uncanny similarities, David realized they were triplets. The brothers began spending time together and even opened a restaurant called The Triplets. They also researched who was responsible for their situation, leading them to Dr. Neubauer, and they learned they were not the only victims. David Kellman once said, "We could have spent 20 years together. They took that away from us." Tragically, one of the triplets, Edward Galland, died by suicide in his New Jersey home in 1995. Their story was so compelling, it inspired a film directed by Tim Wardle called Three Identical Strangers, released in 2018. Unit 731, Japan's Dark Secret of Biological Warfare. During World War II, the Japanese Empire was at war with China. Between the 1930s and 1940s, the Japanese army conducted horrific biological warfare and medical experiments on Chinese civilian prisoners. These atrocities took place under the infamous Unit 731, led by General Shiro Ishii. The true death toll remains unknown, but estimates are staggering. Historian Sheldon H. Harris, in a New York Times article, suggested that around 200,000 people may have died as a result. The experiments focused on diseases thought to be useful for biological warfare, including plague, anthrax, dysentery, typhoid, and cholera. What makes this horror even worse is that many of these experiments were not done in controlled labs, but right in the middle of Chinese cities, where innocent civilians lived. The Japanese deliberately contaminated wells with cholera and typhoid, and unleashed plague-infected fleas into populated areas. These were just some of the countless war crimes committed, but the cruelty didn't stop there. Former members of Unit 731 later revealed that prisoners were subjected to poison gas and kept in pressure chambers until their eyes popped out. Another gruesome practice involved chilling prisoners' arms in special freezers to study how cold temperatures would cause soft tissues to peel away and bones to break. Even more disturbingly, the US government allegedly covered up these experiments and their results during the Cold War, as Japan became an ally against the Soviet Union. The Monster Study. The dark side of stuttering research. Some researchers believed that stuttering was not innate but a learned behavior. However, in 1939, scientists at the University of Iowa in the United States took it a step further and tried to prove this theory. According to them, children who stuttered did so because they feared they wouldn't be able to speak. They concluded, and firmly believed, that children who were frightened into thinking they couldn't speak would eventually develop stuttering. The subjects were dictated phrases related to stuttering and were told not to speak unless they were absolutely certain they could say the words correctly. When the results were examined, the researchers realized their belief was incorrect. However, the experiment had turned healthy children into anxious, withdrawn, and silent individuals. Students at the university later referred to this study as the monster study. It is also reported that the university paid large compensation to the victims involved in the study in 2007. The Burke and Hare murders, Edinburgh's dark anatomy trade. In 1828, a series of 16 murders committed over 10 months in Edinburgh, Scotland, shocked the public. These crimes became known as the Burke and Hare murders, or less commonly, the Westport murders. In the 19th century, scientists could only obtain cadavers for anatomical study from executed criminals, a rare occurrence at the time. William Hare was a boarding house owner in Edinburgh who, along with his friend William Burke, resorted to murder to supply bodies. They sold the corpses to the famous Dr. Robert Knox for money. Eventually, the Scottish police uncovered the murders. Hare managed to escape, but Burke was captured and executed. News of the murders outraged the public, leading to the mob attacking Dr. Knox's house. He was saved by soldiers and later continued his work at a hospital in London. Surgical experiments on slaves. The dark legacy of Dr. J. Marion Sims. American Dr. J. Marion Sims is often called the father of modern gynecology. However, his fame largely comes from unethical experiments performed on enslaved women during the 19th century. These experiments focused on a surgical technique to repair a tear between the vagina and bladder known as vesicovaginal fistula. Dr. Sims performed these surgeries on enslaved women without anesthesia. There were two reasons for this. Anesthesia was newly discovered at the time, and Sims believed the operations were not that painful. As a result, he has been heavily criticized for these inhumane surgeries and has become a subject of anti-racism protests. The Stanford Prison Experiment, unveiling the dark side of human nature. Philip Zimbardo was an adjunct psychology professor at Stanford University in the United States. In 1971, he conducted an experiment to test human nature, specifically focusing on how good people behave when placed in bad situations. Out of 70 volunteers, 24 undergraduate students were selected to play the roles of prisoners or guards. The students were placed in a mock prison located in the basement of the university's psychology department. 2 prisoners were initially removed from the study, but the rest quickly adapted to their roles. The adaptation was so extreme that it led to dangerous psychological trauma. Most prisoners suffered mental distress, while 1/3 of the guards began to act sadistically. By the 6th day, Professor Zimbardo realized the participants had fully immersed themselves in their roles and decided to terminate the experiment. Like the 3 identical strangers case, the Stanford Prison Experiment had a profound impact when it became public and was later depicted on the big screen. Notable examples include the German film Das Experiment, 2001, and the American film The Stanford Prison Experiment, 2015. The Little Albert Experiment. Conditioning fear in infants. American psychologist John B. Watson, a leading figure in behaviorism, designed an experiment with his student, Rosalie Rayner, to test the effects of classical conditioning on humans. The experiment focused on whether fear is innate or learned. The subject, an 8-month-old infant named Albert, was exposed to a series of psychological tests. Objects such as a white rat, rabbit, burning paper, wig, and mask were presented, and Albert showed no fear. In fact, he even smiled. In a room containing only a white bed and Albert, a white rat was placed alongside him. Instead of fear, Albert smiled and tried to play with the rat. In the next phase, whenever Albert touched the rat, loud banging sounds were made using two metal rods, causing Albert to cry. After the crying stopped, he tried to touch the rat again, triggering the loud noise once more. This process continued for several days. Later, Watson and Rayner introduced other furry objects like rabbits. As a result, Albert began to fear and cry at the sight of all white and furry objects, even without the loud noise. The researchers took the experiment further by dressing in white beards and furry costumes to approach Albert, embedding a deep fear of white furry things in his mind. Published in February 1920 in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, the experiment proved that fear can be conditioned. However, it was heavily criticized for traumatizing an infant who could not defend himself. Albert's real name was Douglas Merritt, and he died at age 6 from hydrocephalus, a condition involving fluid accumulation in the brain. Nazi experiments, the dark legacy of Josef Mengele. Some of the most horrifying experiments in history are attributed to Nazi doctor Josef Mengele, who operated at the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp in Poland during the Holocaust. Mengele shared the Nazis' obsession with the Aryan pure race and conducted deadly experiments on thousands of Jewish and Romani twins. These terrifying experiments included surgeries such as eye color and gender changes. Nazi experiments were not limited to these. Prisoners were subjected to freezing temperatures and low-pressure chambers to simulate aviation conditions, sterilization, and tests to see how long a person could survive with their skin flayed. Although some doctors responsible were tried as war criminals, Mengele escaped to South America and died in Brazil in 1979 of a heart attack. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think or what topics you want to see next. Your support means a lot and helps me create better content for you. Thanks so much.